Hello. Good morning. Good morning. We are ready to start, please. Good morning. Buenos días. Vamos a partir. Si pudieran cerrar la puerta, por favor. Muchas gracias. Good morning. Good morning. We're going to start, please. If you can take a seat. Buenos días. Stefan, morning. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much. We are 7 minutes late, and it's important to hear our panelists, so let's take advantage of the time. Señor Besanilla, si pudiera tomar asiento, por favor. Okay, thank you very much. This is the official opening for today. First of all, my name is Alfredo Ergas. I'm Director of Invest. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, to the second day of 2023 version of Chile Day. Today, we have a very exciting and interesting agenda, so let's take advantage of that and also try to improve, if we can, what we did yesterday. It was a very good day. Today, I want to welcome to Senador Galilea and Senadora Vodanovic. I don't know if they are here, but if not, you can tell them that I say hello at least. Ms. Rosana Costa, Governor of the Central Bank, Mr. Mario Marcel, Minister of Finance, Mr. Diego Pardow, Minister of Energy, dear members of Invest, authorities, superintendent, and their friends. Again, we will take a minute to thanks on behalf of Invest, board members, everyone who have continued making the event possible. Especially, I want to thanks to HBDC one more time. Thank you very much. For your help and for support for all of this year, and for the rest of the sponsor. Is a long list. You have seen it in the sign. So thank you very much for all of you. And if someone wants to be included during the next year, we're very open to receive new sponsorships. So thank you for that. Today we'll start a panel that the name of the panel is Building a World Green Hydrogen Hub, and I would like to invite Minister Marcel, Minister Pardow, Lucas Aranguena, who is the Global Head of Sustainable Tech and ESG Group at Banco Santander, and Mr. James Callaway, Chairman from EONER. And I will be the moderator. So please, if you want to join me here. Thank you very much. As you know, I don't want to repeat the CV and the presentation from both ministers, because you know them. You know how prestigious and his capabilities. So I just want to thanks Minister Pardow, your first time in the Chile Day, so you are very welcome. And if you like it, you can repeat it. And Mr. Marcel, thank you for being in the panel. I would like to introduce a little what is Lucas is doing. He's the, as I said, he's the global head of sustainable tech and ESG in Banco Santander. He has a very long experience in those kind of technology and new markets. So thank you for coming and to join us. And Mr. James Callaway is the founder and chairman M&A of a green hydrogen project in Chile. He's a very well-known leader in lithium industry also. As a chairman, he's with a very long experience in investor. So thank you, James, for being here. And James will be add the investor perspective to the topic. So if we could move forward, I do have 2 slides, so don't scare about that. It's only to include the tone of the conversation. Here you can see big numbers where we are. What we are doing here is we are discussing about a climate change topic. Those are the numbers of what powered the world in 2022. As you can see, coal is 23%, natural gas 23%, hydro 15%, nuclear 9%, wind 7%, solar 4%. So at the end, the non-renewables is 85.6% and renewables 14%. So I don't know for you, but for me, it has been surprised that the non-renewables are still so big, even though we are plenty of solar panels, plenty of wind. We hear so much about that, but those are the real things, how the energy is coming. And it's a pity, but it will be very difficult to find hydrogen because it's not in the graph. So this is what we are trying to talk right now. It's a very good graph. So if you can move to a second one. And those are the topics that I would like if we can leave this room at the end of this panel with a couple of answers of the things that I'm raising here, that it will be great. First of all, green energy for Chile is a great opportunity for today, for 5 years, for 10 years. Or it's so important the things that can unite and everyone can be together at the same think about what's going on in hydrogen in Chile. So taking account all of the things that where we have so many discussions, so perhaps hydrogen can be something that we are very aligned as a nation. Second, this is a discussion of climate change. The ecosystem where we live, and I don't want to be not in one side or not in the other, but the ecosystem arrives to a maximum and we need to change. Despite your personal views about how fast, how bad we are, we need to understand that we need to change about that. And people, most of the time, they hear only bad news about climate change. So what I want to raise today that for us, that can be an opportunity. Why can be an opportunity? For 2 things that we have. We have a lot of solar and we have a lot of wind, so we can create green energy, and green energy, it will be something that in the future, we presume that everything needs to be green. Copper, lithium, fruits, products. So we are in a special advantage, and we perceive that we have a special things to say to the world. What are important things? We'll take advantage of it or not. That will be part of the discussion, that a question that we need to answer, not only like a government, but also like a community. And Chile faced difficult challenge. For one side is how to maintain growth and improvement the people quality life, and at the same time to take care of the environment. So we need to manage how to do one thing and how to do the other one. As I mentioned, the advantage of renewables energy, it's very important, but we have a lot of competitors that are moving faster. Here we have Lucas that can give us some information, what's going on with Australia, with Mexico, Marruecos, I don't know. There is a list of other countries that are trying to do the same with hydrogen. So we are in a race, so we need to decide how fast we wanna be in this race. The good part of that, in example, that those kind of things, it will be help a lot of decentralization of the country. Remember that we have in the north sun, in the south, wind. So think about it, how the regions can develop, not only in people, not only in investment, but also employment, education. We can have the University of Hydrogen, I don't know. The sky is the limit for thinking what we can do. And at the last, the problem is very interesting to look in that way. We have a lot of sun, we have a lot of wind. What we are trying to think is how to battle, how to put it something that it will be the advantage of those, and how to put it, how to storage that it can be in a way of hydrogen. Of course, the private sector need to say something, they need to take a risk, they need to take the thing that they're supposed to know, and the regulator from their side also need to see how to compete, in example, to what United States is doing with all the subsidies. And at the end, or perhaps at the beginning, we need to think about communities. There will be a lot of investment. We need water for that. We need desalination plants. So we need to deal from the beginning with the communities. So those are the topics that we are planning to hear during this panel. For sure, it will be more interesting what they said. So let's move to a panel. Okay. So the logistic of the panel will be that we're going to give 10 minutes from each one of the participants to make a comment and a presentation. Then we'll be jumped to a question that I will make, and if we have time, we want to give you the opportunity to make questions. So, Mr. Pardow, if you want to start.
There you go.
Thank you, Minister.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Since it's my first time, I brought some slides. I will be quick anyway. I always try to highlight that Chile has two main competitive advantages when we talk about green hydrogen and derivatives. One is, of course, the strength of, I think it's the other way. I should be away so they don't conflict to each other. So one competitive advantage comes from the strength of our natural resources, and that, of course, is very important. We have abundant sun resources in the Atacama Desert. We have abundant wind resources in Magallanes. And we have at least two industrial hubs that can fuel internal demand too. But that's one pillar. The other advantage we have is, as a country, we are committed to climate change policies, and this is not something that started with this government nor with the previous government. It has been this way for at least a decade. Today I'm going to talk about the second pillar, not about the first one. Happy to discuss this on the questions, but how do you build a stable policy in a country like Chile? Well, you have several layers in this one. The first layer came on 2015, our national strategy, energy policy, which lays out a path. Probably the most important highlights is that energy stops being a domestic issue and becomes an industry that has a potential to export both electrons, if we are able to create the infrastructure needed to export electrons to other neighbor countries, but also in a liquid form. And this liquid energy is hydrogen and derivatives. That idea came first in 2015 in our national energy policy that was updated in 2020. Both were highly participative processes in which industry was involved. Then our national green hydrogen strategy kicks in and see how hydrogen can play a role within our broader national energy strategy. And I would say it plays a key role in the three main pillars of our path towards carbon neutrality. Energy is responsible for about 3/4 of the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Of those 3 quarters, one of them is the decarbonization of the electricity matrix, another quarter comes from mobility, and another quarter comes from industry and houses. In each of these quarters, green hydrogen is key, especially for the last mile. In mobility, for long-hauling distances and industry that requires transport of heavy load, that's where hydrogen has a competitive advantage, also in bunkering and in sustainable airline fuels. In industry, in hard-to-abate industries, especially in those industrial processes in which heat is an important element of the production process, hydrogen and derivatives is a key way of decarbonizing those industries. And in the decarbonization of the electricity matrix is a way of storing energy that will be key, especially in the last part of the decarbonization process, in which we have to not only phase out coal, but also natural gas and diesel. Then we came to the Green Hydrogen Action Plan that we are currently developing. We received, as a government, a national strategy on hydrogen that was developed by the previous government and set some goals. Those are the goals that are set forth in the slide. We decided to keep those goals as a signal of stability. This is a state policy. We will continue the path that was initiated by the previous government, but we need to shift a little bit. The goals that were on the national green hydrogen strategy of the previous government are basically output goals. They are focused on the productive output of the industry, basically gigawatts of electrolysis capacity and tons of product. We want to move that strategy also to the input. We want to talk about industrial jobs created by the industry. We want to talk about the infrastructure required to deploy this industry. And we also want to talk about the impact on communities. Why is this shift? Because the original strategy was very well thought for an initial stage in which you want to call the attention of investors, and then you of course talk about output, in productive output, because that's the way you pay your debts, you pay your capital contributions. But as we move towards an industry that is going to be deployed in particular places, in particular communities, we need to talk about not only about productive outputs, but we also need to talk about jobs. We also need to talk about the impacts on those communities. And that's what we are doing right now. And how are we doing in this last layer of what we want to be a clear and stable policy? We tried to build stability in 2 different dimensions. The first one is we want to build stability in terms of time. We built a strategic committee in which there is a former president of Chile, but there are also a former Minister of Energy, Juan Carlos Jovet, who was responsible for the initial strategy that was presented in the last slide. There are other members of the cabinet of previous government, former members of former Minister of Public Works. And we also want to build stability across the different layers of government. We also want to involve regions. In Chile, we have different layers. There is the national government and there is the subnational government. And we decided to invite 2 of the 2 governors, the governor of Magallanes and the governor of the region of Antofagasta, which are the 2 main production hubs of hydrogen. And we want to invite them in this strategic committee that is monitoring the development of this action plan. Again, this is a way of building stability both in terms of time, a bipartisan stability, if you want to put it this way, but also stability in terms of how the different layers of government react to this action plan. Insofar, we have had 2 sessions. The first session discussed sustainability, and you can see here what are the key topics. In this strategic committee, there is also a lot of representative of sustainability NGOs, and I think we were able to agree, which is something to be proud of, in that the industry development, we have a unique window of opportunity, and we have to seize that opportunity. We also want to have high standards for the development of the industry. But setting those standards is going to take time, so we have to find a way to seize this window of opportunity, developing these standards that will take time, and so we have to find a way of dealing with this intermediate time in which projects are going to be presented, but the standards are not going to be ready. And the way of dealing with these early movers is to fostering their projects, but also working with them in order to satisfy the expectation of the local communities, basically doing policy. We also have a session on international dimension that basically developed what has been this international openness that our trade policy has been developing in the last couple of decades, but also highlighted the importance of diversification of players. I travel a lot to different countries, and in many countries, climate policies are a battleground between different parties. Typically, progressive parties fight with conservative parties on climate policies. In Chile, it's not that much the case. I would say that the reason for that is twofold. First, in many countries, climate policies imply a reduction of industrial jobs. In Chile, climate policy involves an increase of industrial jobs. And in many countries, the climate policy also involve reduction of economy. In Chile, it involves further developing our economy, more complexity in our economy. We are importers of fossil fuels. So as we move to clean energy, we also gain in sovereignty, and we are able to build also stronger national strategy. So national interest is also behind clean energy policy, and that's why I think it's a more bipartisan issue. And the idea of diversifying the players, not putting all the eggs in one basket, it was a key part of this second session. On the first topic, as I said, we have a very strong trade policy that will our hydrogen strategy will follow on that openness that characterize our trade policy. Also, it is one of the key elements in which we agreed on this committee. It is that many countries are trying to develop this industry with direct subsidies to what it is conceived as an export product. We see this as something conflictive especially with WTO rules. Putting subsidies to a product that is meant to be exported is something that sooner or later is going to be conflictive with WTO rules. So we're trying to build something different. We're trying to build something more based on market rules. That's one thing. And we also want to have a role. Julio is here. Oh, Julio just left, but he was there. So we are also trying to use what is already in place, the infrastructure that is already in place, and we see that government has a role in fostering the retrofitting of infrastructure. One key issue, and I will finish with this, is that we need to, of course, certification is very important in an international market like this one, but we We have made a lot of progress in certifying the green electrons that comes from clean energy. We also have a lot of progress in certifying the carbon molecules that come from industrial process and feed on e-fuels. But we also think that we need to certify also the standards that are behind the productive processes. We don't want this, we don't want that hydrogen development becomes a race to the bottom. As a planet, we are in the middle of a threefold crisis. The emissions is one part, but biodiversity is also part of the crisis. So if we don't want to, that the push for creating green hydrogen and derivatives threatens biodiversity, we also have to find a way of certifying also not only the green electrons and the carbon molecules, but also the quality of the process behind the relationship with communities, behind the environmental impact assessment. And on the permits, of course, we have a lot of work to do. We have redundant permits. We need to find ways of speeding up the process. But there is a role for permits that hasn't been discussed in so far. We see the government has a role in dealing with something that comes with the industrial organization we are facing. Green hydrogen and derivatives is an industry that is supposed to be developed by the private sector. But relying on private sector and fostering heterogeneity on the private sector and diversification of players comes with a coordination problem. So there is a role in the permits to foster some coordination, especially in infrastructure, between what are competitors, and also in permitting we need to find a way that incentivize the retrofitting of current infrastructure. There is a lot of that can be done with the overlapping the phase out of coal facilities and the emerging green hydrogen economy, and there is also a lot of things that can be done with the oil operation in Magallanes and the infrastructure that is currently in place and can be retrofitted into export facilities for green hydrogen and derivatives. So that's it, what I have today. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Marcel, if you want to continue.
Yes,
You can speak city.
I think so. Yeah. Let me just point at a couple of issues that elaborate a little on what Minister Pardow has just presented. As he indicated, I think that we have to think about green hydrogen as a project that started in Chile not yesterday, not 2 years ago, but more than 10 years ago, when we began to change our energy matrix towards renewables. Perhaps at that time there was not a view on that this would lead to the development of an industry of this kind, but I think that there was a lot of vision at that time, and we should certainly value that. And when we compare ourselves with other countries in the world, I think that we have to think starting from there, not from what happened last week or a month ago. Now, still, green hydrogen is an emerging, developing industry, and then we need to think about it in those terms. This is not a well-established industry with technology that is well known and so on, but actually many things are under constant development. So what that means for public policy is that we should think of at least 3 dimensions that may be key to an industry like this. First of all, on the regulation side, we should abstain from the notion of just, treating this as within a broader general category of investments. We need to think of it as a category in itself, And I think part of the agenda on the action plan for green hydrogen is to develop green hydrogen as a specific typology for environmental assessments and a number of other permitting processes. I think that the notion of a specialized category is particularly justified by the fact that when you are dealing with green hydrogen, you're thinking not just on any other investment where you want to assess the environmental impact of investment itself, but actually what you're trying to do is to develop an industry that by itself will reduce emissions not only in Chile but elsewhere in the world. So first of all, we need to adapt regulations to the development of this industry so that by keeping our environmental standards, we acknowledge this specific contribution to reducing emissions, and then we speed up the permitting processes by specializing or developing a tailor-made assessment process that can speed up the whole thing. Part of that should include the development of baselines that shorten and make it less expensive the work that the sponsors themselves have to develop. Secondly, on the financial side, we need to think of green hydrogen as in perhaps two dimensions. First of all, that the kind of financing that you need in this case comes closer to project financing than just to fund a corporation or a business. And that means that you have to take care of a number of risk dimensions where financial instruments should be able to reduce the degree of risk in developing new projects, reducing the exposure to risk, both on the technological side and also on the economic side. And I think that we should learn from some of the challenges that we have found in the growth in the renewable energy industry to note that in addition to technology, markets or whatever, we will probably face a number of coordination challenges that will be pretty important. And that means that on finance, we need to think more, not just in terms of the availability of funding for projects, but on a particular type of funding, perhaps more venture capital, and also risk management instruments that reduce the degree of exposure to risk for these projects. And thirdly, we also need to think of the logistics of the green hydrogen industry. That means thinking of the logistics starting from the building of plants, the building of solar plants, of wind power plants, and then to the industrial processes themselves, and then the transformation of green hydrogen into a commodity that can be exported elsewhere in the world. So that involves transportation, involves ports, involves building permits, involves infrastructure, and so on. Those three areas are three areas where we are focusing in the steps that we have been taking towards the Green Hydrogen Action Plan. As Minister Pardow explained, that plan is expected to be finished during this second half of the year, but we advanced a number of steps a few weeks ago that will be definitely part of that, and they precisely touch upon these three issues: regulation, finance, and logistics. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Minister. And now, Lucas, if you can give us the flavor of what's going on outside Chile and how advanced are our competitors.
Great, thank you, Alfredo. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having Banco Santander and sharing this great panel with Minister Pardow, Minister Marcel, and such a successful businessman and environmentally minded entrepreneur, global entrepreneur, I should say, like James. So it's a privilege for Santander to share a stage here today and talk about something that for us is a passion and a highly strategic topic for Banco Santander. I was actually invited to speak last year. I guess I behaved last time around as I've been invited again. This time, great to see the commitment of having two very senior officials from the Chilean government discussing this topic, right? So I'd like to give an overview as to what we see in the global hydrogen market. And when we talk about hydrogen, we're talking about hydrogen derivatives, so whether in the form of ammonia or methanol or any of its derivatives. There is a global market that is being put together. Our work within Banco Santander is to advise clients on pursuing their investments and developing their projects. For that, I spend my days and nights sometimes talking with developers of hydrogen projects worldwide. I spend a lot of time with off-takers. It's critical to understand how the off-take market is going to play out. And discussing a lot with investors as well. And that's the magic trifecta of suppliers, off-takers, and investors. But we are spending increasing amount of time also discussing with policymakers, because indeed energy policies and financial and fiscal policies are becoming very important in this new hydrogen ecosystem that is being built. So maybe I can explain what's going on the demand side very quickly. And what I can tell you is, by speaking with the largest off-takers in the world, is there is no way back. So a hydrogen economy is being created as we speak. And there will be countries with very high demand of hydrogen that will not be able to cope with their own production, that will be net importers of hydrogen. I think that's where the big opportunity for Chile stands. And we're talking about three key regions or three key countries. This is going to be Japan, this is going to be Korea, and this is going to be Europe. Those three poles will be demanding hydrogen at a very large scale. And we know that's going to happen because we are now seeing the infrastructure that is going to be needed to decarbonize industries, for shipping, for fertilizers, and that's been built as we speak. And they're going to be in high demand of that clean molecule to progress their agendas. And it's not just a decarbonization agenda. I think that was very much at the outset of the beginning of the hydrogen economy. It's also about, and the ministers alluded to this, it's also about energy security. So think about what has happened in this side of the world, in Europe, with the war in Ukraine, and Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 being closed down. We've realized that actually you cannot depend on energy partners. You need to build your own independence, energy independence. And it's also about energy price security, right? So the volatility that we've seen in the energy markets over the last 3 years have also, and we've seen industries in Germany, for example, stopping business because they could not afford the price of the molecule. So the demand side is going to be there, is not just economic policies, financial policies, geopolitics that are playing a role there. And it's going to be a very prominent industry by the end of this decade. It's going to take a few years to build that infrastructure, both on the supply and demand side, but it's going to be a thriving industry by the end of this decade, and it's only going to grow going forward. So what's going on the supply side, and this is where it's interesting for a country like Chile, right? I think it's worth noting that there are some big, I'd say, gorillas entering the room here. And the big gorillas entering the room is the US, the Middle East, Europe as well, although Europe will be a net importer of ammonia. And they are entering the room with a very strong conviction. They want to be a supplier of the clean molecule to the world. There is no way back for them. And why I say such degree of, that they have such a degree of conviction, because they are putting their money where their mouth is effectively, right? So if you go into the US, you've got subsidies on the capex development of green hydrogen production, but you also have incentives on renewable power that goes on top of up to $3 per kilo, this is $3 per kilo, on clean hydrogen. And on top of all those, let me call it subsidies, very often you have DOE, Department of Energy money that goes on top of, plus incentives from local states for developers to build their plants in their states. So it's layer on top of layer on top of layer of incentives and subsidies. This applies as well to Japan. Japan doing it in a bit of a different way because they acknowledge they're not going to be developing their own local production infrastructure. They're going to rely on third parties. And therefore, they're going to be providing subsidies to offshore producers of green molecules. So again, the emergence of U.S., the Middle East is playing a very prominent role. Europe as well, although they're going to be net importer. Other countries are now trying to enter the scene as well, like Australia, that did not have that level of conviction. And I guess the question is that it, right? Is that a closed game? Is there a role for Chile to be played in that, that new landscape that is being created? And the answer is that it's still yet to be seen and it's still yet to be decided what's going to be the role of countries outside of those very privileged club of big developers, right? And there is definitely appetite in Europe and in Asia to have a wider and more diverse set of suppliers of green hydrogen. So there is definitely a demand out there and an opportunity for a country like Chile to play a role into that landscape. And the question is how to achieve that. I think is building and strengthening this public-private partnership. I think the government of Chile is showing great strategic conviction that this is the right thing to do, and it's great to see. But there is more to be done. Other countries are trying to occupy that space, like Brazil, with very low energy prices and a lot of hydro that runs 24 hours. That is very very important for hydrogen production, the reliability of energy. North Africa is looking into injecting their clean hydrogen into pipes that will fall into Europe. So all that part of the landscape is still to be reconfigured.
Yeah. Thank you, Luca. Maybe before to jump, if we need to make a grade from 1 to 7, because this is the scale in Chile, in terms of develop and advance of regulation, market, investment, how you qualify Chile today?
Compared to what is a 7? If a 7 is US or a 7 is North Africa? That's,
7 is where we want to be.
Right. Listen, you're putting me on the spot there.
Of course.
Because I'm sitting.
That's the fun of a panel. If not, it will be too boring.
I'm sitting next to two ministers here, so I don't.
Okay, so think about it. Okay, James, go ahead. James.
Don't ask me that question.
Okay.
Well, first of all, it's a real honor to be here with all these wonderful panelists. I'm humbled to be here, and I might start off and just say that I'm going to ditto a lot of the things that have already been said, because I don't want to repeat myself, but I think that the framework that's been provided before me is spot on. So I'm very excited about that. Let me just, for purposes of diversity of discussion, let me take it from a sort of deeply practical perspective. For the last, first of all, I've been investing in Chile now for 11 years, and I've been investing in this region for 17 years, building large capacity facilities, industrial facilities, whose sole purpose is to bring down emissions in the world. And I don't do this anymore at my age. My wife always says, what in the heck are you doing at 65, working harder than ever in your life? And it's really to try to, it sounds Pollyannish, but to try to help save the world. And I really think there's a deep urgency about bringing down emissions. And I do believe that Chile has a very, very important role to play, not just in terms of its own decarbonization, because I think, I was struck, Mr. Marcel, by your slide about the percentage of domestic production that will be renewable. It's clear to see. It puts you in a very rare place of being a quite decarbonized society here. And so I think that you can achieve, and that's a contribution to the world. But
Correct.
For sure, as a model of decarbonization, and we need those models in this world, this turbulent world we're in. But I think that you also have in green hydrogen and ammonia, particularly ammonia because it's more easily transportable. I think you have such an enormous capacity here. It could ultimately be at the very bottom of the cost curve to not just supply the needs of 20 million people in Chile, but to be literally the Middle East of this green economy. So I really want to emphasize that I have incredible hope for the potential here. For 3 years, my team at MAE, led by our wonderful Chilean team, has been having our head down very quietly, working in the great amount of detail to define what is the right scale of commercial facilities. MAE, by the way, we call it MAE, but that's just because nobody anyplace else in the world would be able to say Mejillones Ammonia Energy. That's what it's named for. So we've been focusing there. And I would just say one thing about our particular act, because I want to talk more broadly. We don't have a plan B or a plan C or a plan D as a company. A lot of the players that you'll see running around here in Chile have 25 projects all over the world, and they're sort of playing it out to see which one gives them the best deal. We're not doing that. We have one project. Our entire team is Chilean. We've been working tirelessly, quietly, to actually put together all of the elements that are necessary. And by the way, all of the elements are a lot of different things. Water, in a super evaporitic environment in Mejillones, incredibly important and challenging. We've come up with some really great ways to reduce our use of water and also to use old water, gray water, and purify it ourselves so that we can reuse water from waste systems. I mean, all these kinds of things. The port facilities, incredibly important, particularly for early production. We need to have port facilities where we don't have to go and do much reinforcement of those ports in order to become large-scale exporters. Because if you start messing around with ports and water resources, you just have to add time. It just takes time to get this done. So we've identified and secured our engineering on really the best port, we think, in Mejillones. The power systems, in the end, what your cost of your input of power, your OPEX cost, operating cost, is almost exclusively derived from how much your power costs are, and what we in the industry parlance we would say is your capacity factor that you actually get in the plant. Because you can have, for instance, and this is a problem we have in this country, and I bring it up not because I wish this was the problem, but it is the problem, and I think we should all really talk about it, is that you have a perverse situation. You have the best wind on earth down in the south, and you got absolutely the best solar on earth in the north. Well, great, but like in the case of the solar, you might be able to get 35 or 40% capacity factor out of it. So that means your plant sitting there, if you have direct solar, that's it. Most of the time the plant's sitting not being utilized. And when you talk about projects, when we talk about these projects, it's very important. We think about 300 megawatts is, by the way, when you get to sort of an optimal initial economy of scale. We're talking about, when you add it all up, it's $1.5 billion, $1.8 billion of capital that's involved in this. And so it has to be done with structured finance. It really is going to be done with structured finance. And that means that we have to have good economics. If we're sitting at 40% capacity factor, that's very difficult to achieve. And the only way to get to the returns you need is to have a high assumption about the selling price of your end materials. And as the higher your price that you have to assume in your models and the offtakes that are associated with it, the more difficult it is to get durable offtakes at those prices, and therefore becomes a problem in structured finance. So these things are very important. And my last comment about this is there needs to be a deep, hard look at this, because in the end, what we need to find a way to do is get a bridge. And I'm sorry to go on, but I'm going to talk just for a second about this. It's really interesting. So ultimately, and I would guess, and it's only a guess, I should mention that I'm one of the world's leading producers of lithium. And so I deal with all the battery people all over the world all the time at a deeply practical level. And the innovation that's going on in mass storage is incredible. And by the way, we're seeing prices falling faster on mass storage than we would have expected even 2 years ago, which is awfully important because solar costs, as you know, are just collapsing. It's unbelievable. From 10 years ago to now, it's just a completely different world. The real question is what is the cost and timeline for meeting of the production of electrons and storage of electrons? Because at a certain point, we get past this difficult bridge of trying to connect wind and solar, and I believe in Atacama, because we have the best solar on the planet. By the way, about 20% better than anybody else on Earth. Just want to put that in context. Unbelievable. As soon as the storage costs fall enough, and we can load shift, we can produce larger and larger amounts of solar and storage and get these large capacity factor expansions. So the challenge, in my judgment, for the Atacama is that we be extremely aggressive and very thoughtful about how government and industry can work together during this transition. Because right now we don't have affordable storage. We don't. Okay, we're getting there, but we're not there. So, and we don't, in my opinion, have time to wait. We don't have time to sit here and wait for all of that to emerge. It'll be too late because of what was just being talked about. The other market participants will overwhelm Chile. So we have to have a position here. We have to take an aggressive position, say, no way are we going to let the United States or Europe or anybody come in here and take what is really your rightful place as the world leading producer. You got to move it now. We got to take advantage of it. We have to find certain hubs that we focus our attention on. We're going to have to bring wind into play with nocturnal wind, with daytime solar. We have to find common infrastructure and strategies to do that. I don't think it can only be done by the private sector, by the way. I really just want you to know, I think that's hopeful. That's very hopeful, but not likely. But if we can make that transition, it's a short period of time in which we have to have these supports, because once we get to a certain point with the cost of storage, the Atacama is going to absolutely dominate and have a structural cost advantage on the whole world forever. And so this could become as important or more important than copper, in my opinion. And we need to do that because this country deserves it, and it's got the great resources of the world. So that's my main point. Thank you.
So we are fully convinced about what James said. So right now, everything in life, execution and is the word, what to do. And Minister Pardow, I would like to ask you which kind of practical things, and taking advantage that Mr. Benavente is here, I don't know if Corfo has a role also, and ENAP has a role, practical things that you are envisioned that it will be taking place in the short term, in the same line as James has suggested.
Okay, so one thing that I think it's important to highlight in where we stand right now is that in many countries there is a lot of talk about hydrogen, but they do not have much production ongoing. And that's one difference, I would say, with Chile. We have not, there are not commercial facilities yet, but we have at least 3 ongoing production processes. That helps a lot in understanding what is needed on the supply side. We have Harboni on Magallanes that is currently producing. We have like a forklift facility that is actually working in an industrial environment, and we have a residential application of hydrogen in Coquimbo that is blending hydrogen with natural gas, and it's actually being used in stoves and for domestic purposes. I don't think that there's no other country that is actually as far as in the application as we're, and that even if these are pilots, it helps a lot to understand what comes ahead. And I think what lies ahead is a challenge to try to deploy these industries in particular communities, in particular hubs, in which there's a low-hanging fruit. And I would say there are low-hanging fruits in Magallanes with the infrastructure of an app that it's already in place, and at least for the first commercial stages, probably the larger projects will need, that will come later on. They will need their own facilities and such. But at least for the first commercial stages, retrofitting is of course a solution. And in the north, Mejillones, Tocopilla, these coal towns that are associated with the power generation based on coal, and they are phasing out on those facilities. Retrofitting those